Sarah Matthews sat at her kitchen table, the weight of the world pressing down on her. It was late afternoon, and the sun cast long, jagged shadows across the worn wooden surface, the scratches of countless family meals and late-night homework sessions etched into the grain. But now, it wasn't the remnants of those happy moments that haunted her, it was the mountain of bills that lay scattered in front of her. Each envelope was a silent accusation, reminding her of the overwhelming weight she had been carrying for the past 2 years. The financial burden, the emotional toll, the loss, it was all too much. 2 years ago, her world had shattered when Tom, her husband, the love of her life, had suddenly passed away. And just like that, the vibrant, hopeful woman she used to be had aged a decade. At 38, Sarah felt the years weigh heavily on her. Her once bouncy auburn hair now had strands of grey at the temples, and fine lines had formed around her eyes, lines carved not just by time but by sleepless nights, stress, and worrying. She absently twirled her wedding ring, a habit she developed in the lonely months since the accident that had turned her life upside down. The symbol of her love, now a reminder of everything she had lost. From the living room, the sounds of her children's laughter and bickering echoed through the apartment. The noise was constant, like a storm that never quite settled, but it was also the lifeblood that kept Sarah going. Michael, her 11-year-old son, was in charge, as always. His voice patient, protective, carried over the laughter of his younger siblings, Lily and Jamie. "No, Jamie, you can't move your piece there," Michael said, his tone firm yet loving. "Remember, you can only move forward, not backward." 6-year-old Jamie whined, frustrated. "But I want to go there, Michael," ever the big brother, replied with exasperated affection. "Those are the rules, squirt." Sarah couldn't help but smile despite the weight that pressed on her chest. Her children, Michael especially, had stepped up in ways she could never have imagined. After Tom's death, Michael had taken on a protective role, looking out for his adopted siblings, Lily and Jamie, as if he were already a father. The decision to adopt had been an easy one for Sarah and Tom. Both of them had hearts big enough to open up to children who needed love and care. But the financial strain was relentless. The substitute teaching jobs Sarah juggled weren't enough to make ends meet. The mortgage, utilities, groceries, school supplies, everything was becoming a stretch. It felt like she was treading water, struggling to keep her head above the rising tide of expenses. Every day, she faced the same overwhelming reality: something had to change. Her gaze drifted to the small local newspaper folded neatly on the corner of the table. She pulled it toward her absently, flipping through the classified section with a tired sigh. Retail jobs, waitressing gigs, office work, nothing that would make a real difference. Nothing that would pay enough to support a family of 4. Just as she was about to set the paper aside in frustration, a small ad caught her eye. Housekeeper needed for Oakwood Manor, flexible hours. Competitive pay, experience preferred but not required. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Oakwood Manor, the mansion on the hill that everyone in town knew about. Owned by the reclusive Coldwell family, the estate stood empty most of the year, only occasionally hosting gatherings or events. The pay listed in the ad was significantly higher than anything else she'd seen. And the flexible hours, that could be a game changer with her kids' schedules. But then came the self-doubt. What did she know about being a housekeeper for a mansion? Her cleaning experience was limited to their small apartment and the occasional tidying up of her classroom when she taught. What if she wasn't cut out for it? What if she made a fool of herself? Moments later, the question that had been haunting her for months rang through her mind. What did she have to lose? As Sarah stirred a pot of spaghetti, the noise from the living room continued. Her children's laughter and squabbles filled the air. But even amidst this chaos, Sarah knew that they deserved better than this. They deserved more than the hand-me-downs and makeshift school supplies. Moments later, the question that had been haunting her for months rang through her mind. What did she have to lose? As Sarah stirred a pot of spaghetti, the noise from the living room continued. Her children's laughter and squabbles filled the air. But even amidst this chaos, Sarah knew that they deserved better than this. They deserved more than the hand-me-downs and makeshift school supplies. If you feel inspired by Sarah's journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support keeps me motivated to create more meaningful content like this. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to stay updated on future videos. Now, I have a question for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which do you think is more important, taking a leap of faith, even when it feels risky? Be playing it safe and sticking with what you know. Let me know your answer in the comments, and let's start a discussion about the choices we make in life. Sarah Matthews had always thought of herself as someone who could weather the storms. Life hadn't been easy, but with Tom by her side, she believed they could face anything together. Their love was solid, stronger than the challenges that life threw at them. When they made the decision to start a family, it felt like the natural next step in their perfect life. They both shared a deep desire to give children a loving home. Their decision to adopt was easy as falling in love all over again, only this time, it wasn't just the two of them, they had room for more. They welcomed Lily and Jamie, who, like Michael, were now their own, their children by choice, their family by love. But then, without warning, that perfect life shattered. Tom was gone. 1 minute, he was there, and the next, he wasn't. It felt like the world itself had suddenly tilted, throwing Sarah into a place she had never known. It wasn't just the grief of losing him, it was the overwhelming weight of becoming the sole person responsible for everything. The bills, the house, the kids. Tom had been the rock, and now she was the foundation. She had no choice but to step into the role he'd left behind. The loss of Tom was more than just the absence of her husband, it was the absence of an anchor, the absence of a partner who had always been there through thick and thin. Sarah couldn't deny that every day felt like she was walking alone now. It was a kind of loneliness that crept up when you least expected it, even in a room full of people. The quiet that filled the house, the bed she slept in by herself, the routine that she and Tom had once shared, now was hers alone. She didn't just miss him in the big, monumental moments, she missed him in the little things, like when the kids were fighting, and there was no one there to back her up, to remind her that they were just kids. She missed hearing his voice, that quiet, reassuring tone that made everything feel okay. But even in the deepest of her pain, Sarah knew one thing for certain. Her children were her reason. They were her world, they had to be. The thought of giving up was impossible. She wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was living for them. Michael, her oldest, stepped up in ways that she hadn't expected. At just 11, he became the protector of his younger siblings, taking on a role that Sarah couldn't help but admire. Michael was always so serious, so mature for his age, and it was clear that he wasn't going to let anyone forget that he was the man of the house now. There was a heaviness in his eyes, one that didn't belong to a child, one that didn't belong in anyone's world, but especially not his. It wasn't just the weight of responsibility that Michael carried, it was his constant vigilance. Watching him stand between his siblings during their small squabbles, his brow furrowed in concentration as if he were deciding the fate of the world, made Sarah's heart ache. This was her son, a boy who should be out playing, laughing, running with his friends. Instead, he was holding together the small threads of a family that had unraveled in ways she couldn't fix. And then there were Lily and Jamie. Sarah had to admit, at times it felt like they were still too young to fully understand the magnitude of what had happened. But that didn't make them any less aware of the absence of their father. Lily, with her giggles and infectious laughter, was the light of the house. But even her joy couldn't mask the unspoken tension. She was the one who missed the bedtime stories her father used to read, the games they used to play, the way his presence made everything seem safer. She didn't say it, but Sarah saw it in the way Lily clung to her, sometimes a little too tightly, as if she were afraid of losing her too. Jamie, the youngest, didn't fully comprehend the depth of the loss, but he could feel it. He didn't understand why Dad wasn't coming back, and his confusion was the hardest for Sarah to watch. His little questions, the ones he asked when the house felt too quiet, were the ones that tore her apart. When is Daddy coming home? Jamie would ask, his innocent eyes wide with hope. Sarah had no answer to give. What do you say to a child who has lost something they can't even fully understand? The hardest part of her days was when she had to shield her children from the truth, when they needed answers and all she had were empty promises. But despite the overwhelming grief, Sarah found solace in the small moments. The laughter at the dinner table, the moments when Lily's giggles would break through the sadness like a ray of sunshine. She held on to those moments like they were treasures. Because even though her world was falling apart, she still had them. And as long as they had each other, she would fight to hold on to the fragments of what was left. Michael's attempts at keeping things together, Lily's lightheartedness, and Jamie's innocent love, these were the things that gave Sarah the strength to get up each day and face the world. The weight of the bills, the loneliness, the crushing burden of being everything to everyone, it was all so much to bear. But she wasn't just Sarah Matthews anymore. She was Michael's mother, Lily and Jamie's protector, and nothing could break that bond. It was the one thing that kept her grounded. Yet, it wasn't easy. Nothing about their life was easy. Each day felt like a battle, a fight for survival. Sarah had to navigate through the maze of grief, financial hardship, and motherhood on her own. No more late-night talks with Tom, no more shared glances across the room when they needed a silent partner. She was alone, and the loneliness felt like a physical presence, always lurking, always reminding her of what she had lost. But Sarah Matthews wasn't a woman who gave up easily. She couldn't, not for herself, and certainly not for her children. They needed her to keep going, to keep fighting. No matter how heavy the weight of the world became, she would carry it. Because, in the end, it wasn't the financial struggles, the loneliness, or the grief that defined her. It was her unwavering love for her children, the family she had built, and the promise she made to herself that she would never let them fall. Through it all, Sarah's children were her light, the one thing that kept her grounded. Their love, their laughter, and their need for her reminded her of why she couldn't stop. No matter how hard it was, no matter how overwhelming it felt, she would always rise for them. In that small, quiet apartment, amidst the noise of daily life, Sarah Matthews was rebuilding, one step at a time, one day at a time. And while she couldn't see the future clearly, she knew that no matter how dark it got, she wasn't walking alone. Not anymore. She had her children, and for them, she would find a way to make it work. They were her world, her everything, and as long as they had each other, they would survive. The pressure had been mounting for weeks, the relentless tick of the clock reminding Sarah Matthews that something had to change. Every day, the pile of bills seemed to grow taller. The mortgage, the utility bills, the groceries, all the things she had to balance on her shoulders, all while trying to keep her children's lives as normal as possible. But normal was a luxury Sarah couldn't afford anymore. Her mornings began like clockwork, getting the kids ready for school, packing lunches, checking homework. She moved through the motions mechanically, trying to push the mounting anxiety from her mind, but the weight of it was always there, lingering just beneath the surface. Tom's death had left an indelible mark on her life, one that couldn't be erased. She missed him more than she thought possible, but it wasn't just the absence of her husband that hurt. It was the knowledge that the life she once knew, where the future felt full of promise, was gone. It was only Sarah who carried the burden now. She was the sole provider, the protector, the one who had to figure out how to make ends meet. It wasn't just the financial struggles, though they were immense. It was the constant battle to keep the family afloat, to shield her children from the truth that there was no easy fix. Her heart broke for them. Michael, already growing up far too fast, should have been out playing with friends, not worrying about making sure Lily and Jamie were okay. And Lily, with her infectious giggle, had started to understand that things weren't right, even if she couldn't put it into words. Jamie, so young and unaware, asked questions that Sarah couldn't answer. When is Daddy coming back? His little voice was so full of hope. But Sarah had no words that could soften the blow of his innocence. She didn't want to break their spirits. She didn't want them to feel the full weight of what she carried on her own. They had already suffered too much. The reality, however, was that something had to change. Sarah couldn't keep going like this. She was running on empty, exhausted from sleepless nights spent worrying about how she would pay for the next round of bills, wondering how long her current jobs would sustain them. Her substitute teaching gigs barely covered the basics, and the rest of the day was spent trying to make ends meet by doing odd jobs or stretching every dollar as far as it would go. There were days when Sarah would look at her children and feel a wave of guilt wash over her. She wasn't just failing herself, she was failing them too. It was during one of those days, when she sat at the kitchen table staring at the pile of bills in front of her, that her eyes fell upon something new, the newspaper. She didn't even remember picking it up, but there it was, sitting on the table next to her coffee cup, its pages crinkling slightly in the quiet of the room. Sarah had been skimming through the usual listings: retail, waitressing, office work. None of it seemed to offer the real change she was looking for. But then, there it was, a small ad, almost easy to miss, tucked away in the corner of the classifieds. Housekeeper needed for Oakwood Manor, flexible hours. Competitive pay, experience preferred but not required. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Oakwood Manor, the mansion on the hill. She had heard rumours about it, how it was owned by the reclusive Coldwell family, a name that seemed to carry weight in the small town. The mansion was a landmark, a place that was talked about, though rarely seen. No one really knew much about the family that lived there. They kept to themselves, coming and going as they pleased. The idea of working there seemed like something out of a dream, something that was just too good to be true. The pay was higher than anything she had seen, and the flexible hours could work with her children's schedules. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. The self-doubt crept in like it always did. What did she know about working in a mansion? What if she wasn't qualified? She had no experience in that kind of work, no training to clean the elaborate rooms, to handle the high-end furniture and fixtures she'd only ever seen in magazines or on television. She had spent her life cleaning up after her kids, but that was nothing like what she was being asked to do now. But then another thought cut through the doubt, sharp and clear. What did she have to lose? If she stayed where she was, things would never change. She couldn't keep scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, putting off what needed to be done because she was too afraid to take a risk. This job might be her one chance to turn things around, to finally get ahead. Sarah picked up the phone and called the number listed in the ad. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, almost distant, but the woman agreed to set up an interview for the following morning. The next day, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. The morning was filled with the usual chaos of getting the kids ready for school breakfast, making sure Michael had his project, helping Lily with her shoes, making sure Jamie didn't lose his jacket again. But this time, there was a new energy in her step. She had a quiet excitement that she hadn't felt in months. She dressed in the best clothes she had, an old blouse and a pair of pants that were just a bit too tight now, but they would have to do. She checked herself in the mirror, her reflection barely recognizable. The woman in front of her was tired, worn down by life, but she still saw a spark in her eyes. There was something there, something that hadn't been extinguished despite everything she had gone through. After dropping the kids off at school, Sarah caught the bus to Oakwood Manor. The journey felt surreal. As the bus passed her neighborhood, the familiar sight-scratched sidewalks, small houses, overgrown lawns gave way to the grandeur of the town's wealthier district. The houses here were enormous, with well-kept gardens and long, winding driveways. Oakwood Manor sat on a hill at the end of the road, its towering gates standing tall, almost ominous in their grandeur. Sarah felt her nerves rise as she got off the bus and walked the last stretch up to the estate. When she stood at the gates of Oakwood Manor, Sarah couldn't help but feel small. The mansion before her was beautiful, majestic even, but it was also a world apart from her own. She wasn't sure if she belonged here, but the thought of her children, their faces, their smiles, their need for her to succeed pushed her forward. She pressed the intercom button, and within moments, the gates creaked open. As she walked through the gates, her heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what was going to happen next. But this was her chance, this was her shot at something better. And no matter how daunting it seemed, she couldn't turn back now. The days blurred together in a haze of routine. Sarah Matthews had become a master at compartmentalizing her grief, her exhaustion, and the crushing weight of her responsibilities. Each morning, she rose to the familiar sounds of her children's demands, the clattering of dishes, the noise of life continuing despite everything that had been taken from her. She had built a new life for herself after Tom's death, a life that was brimming with love, joy, and the ever-present ache of what was missing. But even the joy of her children couldn't erase the hollow emptiness that had settled deep inside her. For weeks, Sarah had felt something was off. It wasn't just the overwhelming financial strain or the endless exhaustion, it was a deeper, more unsettling feeling that lingered at the back of her mind, one she couldn't quite put into words. Something was out of place. She wasn't just living her new reality, she was being swept along in it, drifting in a world that had no anchor. That feeling intensified the moment she walked into Oakwood Manor for the first time. She had expected the grandeur to overwhelm her, and it did. The pristine marble floors, the chandeliers that seemed to stretch into the heavens, the immaculate rooms filled with treasures that seemed both foreign and distant. But it wasn't just the opulence that struck her, it was the sense of history that lingered in the walls, the ghosts of the past that seemed to be watching her as she cleaned. She had always been a practical person, focused on the present, but Oakwood Manor felt like a place where the past was alive, where the stories of the family who owned it still echoed in every corner. It was during one of these long days, spent dusting and cleaning the vast spaces of the estate, that Sarah stumbled upon something that would shatter her carefully constructed reality. It happened in the library, a room that had become her favorite, though, to be fair, she didn't spend much time in any other room. The library was filled with books so old, so valuable, that Sarah often wondered how anyone could ever read them without risking damaging the fragile pages. As she dusted the shelves, she ran her fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books, each one seeming to whisper its secrets to her. It was in this quiet, dusty room that Sarah noticed the photo. The frame was silver, ornate in a way that felt almost out of place in a room that already contained so much beauty. It was the kind of frame that belonged in a museum, not in the corner of an old library. Sarah's hand hovered over it as she carefully dusted the shelf beneath, her breath catching as the photograph came into view. At first, she thought nothing of it, assuming it was just another family portrait hanging in the mansion. But as her eyes focused on the woman in the photograph, her heart stopped. It was her. She stared at the image of a younger woman, laughing in the sunlight, a carefree smile on her face that Sarah barely recognized as her own. The resemblance was uncanny. The auburn hair, the green eyes, everything about the woman in the photograph screamed familiarity. For a moment, Sarah thought she was hallucinating, but the longer she stared, the more it became clear this was her. This was a version of herself she didn't recognize, a woman who seemed so full of life, so free from the weight of responsibility and sorrow that had defined her for so long. The image was like a mirror from the past, one that reflected a life she hadn't lived, one that felt so foreign yet so intimately familiar. Her heart raced as she reached out and picked up the frame, feeling the cold silver against her trembling fingers. The photo was old, perhaps from a time before she had ever really understood what it meant to be happy. The background of the image was a park, the sunlight filtering through the trees, and there was something about the way the woman's eyes sparkled that seemed to draw Sarah in even further. But what was most confusing was the black ribbon that hung delicately over the corner of the frame, as though this woman was no longer alive. Sarah's head swam as she processed the enormity of what she had just discovered. How was this possible? How could this photograph be here, in a mansion that she had only recently started working in? And why did it feel like it was placed there specifically for her to find? She felt her pulse quicken as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She had no memory of this picture being taken, no recollection of ever having been in that park, no recollection of ever being that carefree, that young. The woman in the pictures seemed to be a stranger, and yet she was her. It wasn't just the photo itself that unnerved Sarah. It was the overwhelming feeling that this was no accident. This was deliberate. She could sense it. Something was wrong, and she needed to know why. But what could she do? Who could she ask? She knew no one at Oakwood Manor, except for Mrs. Havisham, the stern head housekeeper, and even if she did have questions, who would believe her? How could she explain this discovery to anyone without sounding completely mad? The only thing she knew for sure was that the woman in the photograph was a part of her somehow, some way. She was tied to this woman. She had to find out why. The idea of simply walking away, of pretending she hadn't seen what she had, wasn't even an option. This photograph was not just a reminder of the past, it was a key, one that could unlock a truth that Sarah had never known, one that had been hidden from her for as long as she could remember. The next few days were a blur of confusion and restlessness. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. It haunted her, filling her thoughts during every waking moment. She knew she had to do something, but the fear of what she might uncover kept her frozen. What if this discovery opened a door to a past that she wasn't ready to face? What if it changed everything she had ever known about herself, about her family, about her life? Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was more than just a simple coincidence. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that this photo held the answers to questions she had never even known to ask. It was no longer just about her work at Oakwood Manor, it was about her life, her identity, and the family secrets that had been buried for far too long. With the photograph burned into her mind, Sarah began to make her plans. She couldn't rest until she knew the truth. But where would she start? Who could she trust with this discovery? And what would it mean for her and her children once the truth came to light? As Sarah pondered her next move, the house became a blur of cleaning duties and the hum of everyday life. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The discovery of that photograph had cracked open a door that she could never close again. And no matter how terrifying it seemed, Sarah Matthews knew that she had to follow this path wherever it might lead because the truth was out there, and it was calling to her. The decision to reach out to Emma was not an easy one for Sarah. It wasn't just the weight of the unknown that made her hesitate, it was the sheer magnitude of what this could mean for her life. What had begun as a simple, yet haunting discovery of a photograph had now grown into something far larger, far more complicated. She hadn't just uncovered a lost piece of her past, she had stumbled upon the very foundation of her identity. A revelation that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed life she had built after Tom's death. For weeks, Sarah had wrestled with the idea. The fear of disrupting Emma's life, the life she had built with the Caldwell family, gripped her every time she thought about it. How would they react to her? Would they welcome her with open arms? Or would she be seen as an unwelcome intruder, someone who didn't belong in the world they had so carefully curated? What would it mean for her children? The questions swirled in her mind, clouding her judgment and leaving her frozen in a state of uncertainty. The truth, however, was that Sarah couldn't forget what she had found. The photograph of Emma had been a wake-up call, a stark reminder that her family was not what she had thought it was. There had always been a sense of something missing, an ache deep in her chest that no amount of time or love could fill. But now, that ache had a face, a name: Emma, her twin sister, the sibling she had never known. And with that discovery came a burning desire to connect, to know her, to understand the life she had lived and the bond they shared, even if that bond had been torn apart long ago. At first, Sarah's thoughts were clouded with self-doubt. Who was she to intrude on Emma's life? She had spent years, decades, building a family of her own. The Caldwell family had given Emma everything: a home, a future, a life she had never known. She was missing. Sarah had no right to disrupt that. But as she thought more about it, the feeling that she was meant to do this, meant to reach out, grew stronger. She couldn't walk away, not when the truth had been laid out before her. She had to know who Emma was, even if it meant risking everything she had. Her decision was not born out of a desire for her own happiness. It was a quiet, steady realization that this was not just about her, it was about Emma, too. It was about the child, now a young woman, who had been placed in a world she had never chosen, a life that had been set for her before she even had a say. Emma, like Sarah, had never had the chance to know her true family, to understand the reasons behind the decisions that had been made for her. And now, Sarah was in a position to change that. The thought of reaching out to the Caldwell family brought with it a mixture of fear and anticipation. Margaret and Richard Caldwell were not just any family. They were wealthy, powerful, influential, everything Sarah was not. They had everything, while she had spent the past few years scraping by, barely making ends meet. The disparity between their worlds seemed insurmountable, and yet, Sarah couldn't ignore the pull that kept her coming back to the idea. She had to at least try. She had to see if Emma wanted to know her. She had to see if the family would accept her, or if her discovery would tear everything apart. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized how much was at stake. If she did nothing, she would spend the rest of her life wondering about Emma, about the twin she had never known. If she reached out and was rejected, she would have to live with the pain of knowing that she had tried and failed. But what if Emma wanted to know her? What if this was the moment to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long? Sarah couldn't live with the uncertainty. She couldn't let this go, not when it felt like her entire existence had led her to this point. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had settled into its usual quiet, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. Her hands trembled as she wrote the letter. She didn't know what to say, how to begin, or even if she should say anything at all. But the words came, slowly at first, then more confidently as the weight of her emotions poured onto the page. She wrote about the discovery, about the photograph, about the overwhelming need to connect with Emma. She wrote about the family she had built and how, no matter what happened, she would always be Michael, Lily, and Jamie's mother. But she also wrote about the part of her that had been missing, the part she now knew was Emma. The letter was simple, but it came from the heart. She didn't know what the Caldwells would think of it, or whether Emma would even want to meet her. But it was the first step. It was all Sarah could do for now. The next morning, Sarah woke early, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. She was nervous, her heart racing in her chest as she made her way to Oakwood Manor. It felt surreal, stepping out of her small, cramped apartment and walking toward a place that seemed so far removed from her world. The mansion loomed in front of her, its gates towering like a wall that separated her from everything she had ever known. She hesitated for a moment, but the thought of Emma, of her missing twin, pushed her forward. She pressed the intercom, her hand shaking slightly as she spoke, introducing herself. A few moments later, the gates swung open. Sarah stepped forward, her pulse quickening as she made her way up the long driveway toward the mansion. The grandeur of Oakwood Manor was even more overwhelming up close, but Sarah kept her focus. She had to do this, she couldn't back down now. As she approached the front door, it opened before she could knock. Margaret Caldwell stood there, her expression unreadable. The moment she saw Sarah, however, something flickered in her eyes: shock, recognition, confusion. "You're Emma's sister, aren't you?" Margaret's voice trembled, her composure cracking as she took a step back, motioning for Sarah to enter. Richard Caldwell appeared behind her, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. They had heard of Sarah, of course they had, but nothing could have prepared them for the woman standing before them, a stranger yet a sister, a link to the past they had all buried long ago. As Sarah stepped into their home, the enormity of what she was doing hit her. She was no longer just Sarah Matthews, the mother of three, struggling to make ends meet. She was now a part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for her, even if she hadn't known it. This wasn't just about finding Emma. It was about finding herself, about understanding where she came from, and about embracing the family that had been hidden from her for so long. The Caldwells, though initially shocked, listened as Sarah explained who she was, why she had come, and what she hoped for. The conversation was slow, filled with hesitation, but also with a sense of shared understanding. Emma's parents were kind but cautious, and as Sarah spoke, she realized just how much they had suffered too. They had lost Emma, not to death, but to the silence of a closed adoption. And now, here she was, the sister they had never known, the family they thought they would never see again. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of this new connection, a bond that was as complex as it was powerful. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had reached out to Emma, she had crossed the divide. And no matter where it led, she knew she had made the right choice. As Sarah Matthews stepped through the gates of Oakwood Manor, she unknowingly embarked on a journey that would change everything she had known about herself, her family, and her past. What began as a desperate search for financial stability had, in an instant, become the unraveling of a buried truth, one that had been hidden for decades. She had gone from a woman struggling with the weight of loss and responsibility to someone standing on the precipice of a profound discovery. Sarah's decision to reach out, despite the uncertainty, was not just about finding Emma, it was about finding her true self, a self that had been obscured by years of hardship and hidden truths. The photograph, the black ribbon, the quiet pull to uncover the truth, these things did not just challenge Sarah's understanding of her family. They forced her to question everything, her identity, her choices, and the life she had built. The family secrets that were locked away in Oakwood Manor had never been part of her world, and yet, in one fateful moment, they were her world. As Sarah began to piece together the fragments of a history she never knew, she realized that the past wasn't something that could simply be left behind. The past shaped her, it connected her to others, and in a way, it defined who she was and who she was yet to become. The lessons Sarah learned were profound, not only in terms of discovering her family's history, but also in understanding the importance of taking risks. She stepped into the unknown, unsure of what she would find, yet she did so because she realized that the life she had been living drifting, uncertain, and marked by grief wasn't enough. Sarah's bravery, her ability to face the discomfort of what she might find, serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest growth occurs when we venture into the places that scare us the most. We grow, not by avoiding the unknown, but by embracing it, by confronting our fears, and by choosing to take that first step even when we can't see the full path ahead. In our own lives, we are often faced with moments of choice, moments where we are pushed to confront difficult truths, to make decisions that might not only change our present, but also redefine our future. Whether it's in our relationships, our careers, or our personal growth, we are all presented with opportunities to uncover deeper layers of ourselves. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes we need to dig deeper, not just into the lives of others, but into our own hearts and minds. We need to ask the difficult questions, face the uncomfortable answers, and allow ourselves the space to evolve. Sarah's journey is a reminder that there is always more to the story than what we see on the surface. We may think we know our own histories, our own identities, but often there are hidden chapters waiting to be revealed. It's only when we are willing to look deeper, to ask the right questions, and to confront the things we might rather ignore, that we truly understand ourselves. Life is not just about the experiences we have. It's about the stories we uncover along the way, the truths we discover about who we are, and the ways in which we allow those revelations to shape our futures. So, what can we take from Sarah's story and apply to our own lives? The first lesson is courage. Courage to face the unknown. Courage to seek the truth even when it feels overwhelming. Life often presents us with challenges, obstacles that seem insurmountable, but it's in those moments that we are given the chance to grow. Sarah's bravery in uncovering her family's past is a powerful reminder that no matter how painful the journey may seem, the rewards of self-discovery far outweigh the discomfort. The second lesson is the importance of relationships. Whether it's family, friends, or even strangers who become part of our lives, the connections we form are what make us whole. Sarah's discovery of her twin sister and the bonds she forms with her biological family show us that our identities are not formed in isolation. They are shaped by the people around us, by the ties we have with others, and by the ways in which we are willing to embrace those connections, no matter how difficult they may seem at first. Lastly, we learn the importance of embracing the past, not as something to be feared, but as a key to understanding our present. The past is often where we find the answers we've been searching for. It's where we find the roots of our pain, our joy, and our purpose. By accepting and embracing our pasts, we free ourselves to move forward with greater clarity, peace, and strength. Now, I want to ask you all, what do you think is more important in life? Of facing the truth, even when it's difficult, and embracing it. Be keeping the past buried and moving forward without looking back. Please share your thoughts by commenting below. I'd love to hear your perspectives. And if you've found value in this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and supporting us with a small donation. Even the smallest contribution will help motivate me to keep creating content like this, content that inspires, challenges, and brings us all closer to understanding the deeper aspects of life. After all, I'm here not just to share stories, but to help others see the power they hold within themselves. Thank you for your time and support. It means the world to me.